to A Well-Designed Business. My name is LuAnn and I'm so glad you found this podcast. Together with my husband Vince and our partner Bill, we have grown our company WindowWorks from the ground up. So I know and I understand the challenges you face in running your interior design business. I also know that your talent alone isn't enough to ensure your success. So on this podcast, we talk about strategies and practical steps to help you grow your business. But make no mistake about it, we have our share of fun here too, mixed in with those aha moments that I love so much. This isn't fluff. Nobody has time for that. Whether you are a new interior designer or a seasoned designer, I am here to help you create and to manage the kind of interior design firm that you dream of. It's straight talk and it's action. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hi, welcome to A Well-Designed Business. How many of you, us, have talked about the importance of diversity in your business? Maybe you've even taken some action to make sure you are a diverse and inclusive workplace. And that's great. It's important. But are you sure it's enough? Today, I'm joined by Jessica Bantom. Jessica is an interior designer and color consultant. She describes herself as a multidisciplinary designer of human-centered solutions and uses her specialization in design thinking to develop and apply innovative approaches that transcend industries. Jessica is also a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging practitioner, DEIB, and a workplace strategist. She helps organizations develop customized strategies for transformational change and enables individuals to act immediately to become more inclusive. More impressively, Jessica has been able to meld these two career paths to benefit this industry, the design industry. In her new book, Design for Identity, How to Design Authentically for a Diverse World, she is helping us all understand the values of DEIB and teaching us the path to become more culturally competent. And it all starts with conversations. I met Jessica last year at the DC Design Collective. Since then, I have read her book, and now I'm working each day to implement her teachings. And today, it is my great pleasure to share Jessica and this conversation with you. Hey, Jessica, thanks so much for joining me on A Well-Designed Business today.
Hi, LuAnn. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
Jessica, I enjoyed reading your book. I have to tell you, I did tell you off air. I'm going to tell all of our friends listening. I really enjoyed reading your book because I loved learning about the things that I didn't know, which is super, super exciting for me. I love that in every field, particularly in this field, because I want to show up as a good person in this planet. And so I really enjoyed learning the things I didn't know. I also want to compliment you on how readable it was, how relatable it was. And it was funny because I read on your website, which is gorgeous, by the way.
Thank you.
My God. It's like, whoa. So I encourage all of you to look at Jessica's website. But on your website, it said that you are known for your superpower, which is making hard topics approachable and accessible with authenticity. And I read that after I read the book. And I thought, well, yeah, that's her superpower. So I really, I want to, just really commend you because I imagine on a lot of levels, it's a difficult conversation in a book to have, a book to write and to approach and all of those things. But I really enjoyed it. And I think that your effort was well spent. And I think you've put together a beautiful thing that's really going to, make this industry think, I have to say.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it means a lot to me too, because I wanted it to be something that people could easily digest.
Yeah.
So that means a lot to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah. And for us here, I love the idea that here we are having this conversation, any conversation that can, get the cobwebs out of our brains and open up our minds, right, is a worthwhile conversation. But to know that you are a practicing interior designer and that you, with the other credibility in the background, that you've got your different marketing experience and IT experience, and teaching and all of the things, it really is that conglomeration of all of those different disciplines, I think, coming together, that is putting you exactly in the right place at the right time with sharing this information. It seems really, I love it when I meet somebody who's walking in the space they were supposed to walk in. That's what it feels like to me when I read your book and talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I will tell you, it's been a winding path that hasn't always made sense to people from the outside. And quite honestly, at some points to me, but I'm glad that everything has kind of come together in this book.
Yeah, yeah. So now here's some of the things, some of the goals of the book is that you're striving to help normalize the challenging conversation about identity and help us to take actions, big and small, to create meaningful outcomes for historically excluded people. So these are some of the things, the ideals and the sentences that stuck out to me as I was reading your book and your website. So I have a couple of questions that I want us to talk about. I'm going to ask you about some terms that you use over and over in the book so that we get it on the same page. But I think before that, maybe Jessica, maybe just, tell us why you were called to write this book. What brought you to this place and time?
Sure, sure. So it was really interesting. I mentioned that my career path has been kind of varied over the years, and it's kind of traveled down two parallel paths. One in what started in IT and went to management consulting, and ultimately DEI, and then the other in interior design. And it was when I made the formal pivot into DEI that I started looking at design differently. So I had always been aware of a lot of the issues I bring up about from my own personal experience in design, being one of few people who look like me in many spaces, noticing that identity in general was not something that we deliberately addressed. And when I started getting into DEI and having those conversations day in and day out about how we interact with each other, about difference, about the change that's required for all of us to kind of move humanity forward. It really started making me think about the practice of design. And, largely in the context of DEI, we usually talk about the internal workings of an organization. So we'll talk about more operational things like recruiting and retention. And we'll talk about things broadly, just like you mentioned, about some DEI concepts overall. But we don't usually get into how to do what we do as a profession with the values of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging embedded into that. So that was where I saw a big gap and also an opportunity because I also feel like addressing DEI in this vein will make it more real to people and will make some of these broad concepts that we talk about in some conversations more real and more applicable to what we're doing day in and day out as designers.
So, and that's the crux of it. And that's what I learned when we had a conversation last week before today. And also by reading your book, I understood it clearly, is it's not that other part of what we do in our firms is unimportant. It is important from an operational standpoint to make sure that we're giving opportunity for people of all races, backgrounds, ethnicities to have qualified jobs, right? To be able to get a good job, earn a living, and blah, 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 right? It's important that we, the showrooms, the design showrooms that treat every designer the same, regardless of their background, their skin color, all of the things. So I love that you mentioned that. But actually, your book focuses on the work of an interior designer, the way a designer. So whether your firm is culturally diverse or not, what are you individually doing in your design? And that's where this book is so eye-opening, actually.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of organizations, to your point, even if they are not culturally diverse or diverse in any other significant dimensions of humanity, a lot of them made statements, especially in the summer of 2020, and made these proclamations about supporting social justice, about being against racial injustice, etc. But they haven't really done anything significant. They're not showing up differently in the way they execute their business.
Right.
And that's the other half, just like we're saying, that we need to address, and that I aim to address in the book. And it's also critical to mention that, just like you said, it's not that all of these internal aspects, that recruiting and retention, addressing your internal culture is not significant, but to truly engage in DEI, to truly rather adopt these values and embed them with integrity, it has to be the same inside as it is externally facing as well. And we can't leave out our external stakeholders. Now, the book specifically, really addresses dealing with customers directly, but this also goes to industry partners. It goes to the industry in general, to support, to causes that we say that we support. How
Yes.
authentic are we, and how we're showing up versus the lip service that we're giving a lot of things. So
Right, right.
yeah.
Well, and some of the ahas that I had as I was reading it were along those lines, right? So we could be an entire firm of Black interior designers, and we could say, okay, we have one white person and one Indian person. We're diverse. Or we could be a firm of all white people, and we've got, one Black person and one Latina person. We're diverse. We got it. We have a DI statement. We're good. But your challenge to interior designers and what you just said there is taking it to the customer, is not just putting the stamp on it inside, but what are those conversations like when you're dealing with your consumer, and how are you preparing your design firm? I think what I heard is, and check me on this, how are you preparing yourself and your design firm to work design across cultures, right?
Correct. And I also want to make sure, too, that when we're talking about culture, and why I specifically say identity, which to me is a broader term in general, is that we are talking about difference across multiple dimensions. Of course, race and ethnicity being key ones, especially in our society, but also looking at age, religion, sexual orientation, body size, all of these things that matter in what we do as designers. We have to open the door and be prepared to have conversation and engage in real meaningful dialogue about those things.
Right, right. And so we're going to get into it. And I think some people right now are like, I don't know. You keep saying it, but I don't get it. Right. Like, I feel like, we're going to further explain what we mean, or what you mean, I should say. Hello. Taking credit for your book now. This is what we mean. Okay. But like, we'll get there. We'll get there, because I think as the conversation unfolds, these layers start to make sense. Okay. So talking about this, get me on the, like, cultural competence is a term that you use a few times throughout the book. You actually take the time to explain what it means. So go through that with us, Jessica.
Yes, and I do. I know I don't even know how many times I repeat the phrase culturally competent throughout the book, but obviously it is a key concept. So it
Yes.
is the cultural competence is the ability to understand, interact with, and appreciate people of different backgrounds or belief systems that are different from your own. And what that essentially boils down to is, just really making space to understand and appreciate that there are different experiences that people have based on different aspects of their identity. And it's about being open minded to what those are, and accepting that there are other realities. Now, you may not have a deep understanding of what all of those realities are. You may not necessarily agree with them, in many ways, but the idea is that we have to be open to the fact that they exist.
Right.
And we also, I think that the concept of appreciating and interacting is really important, and we can only really get used to doing that by doing it. The interaction part is really key, because we can also appreciate things from afar. We can sit at home and read books about people of different backgrounds. We can watch documentaries and still never put ourselves in that situation to have the conversations.
Right.
Cultural competence is about flexing those muscles and getting used to doing that, getting used to being in those situations, putting yourself in those situations, and opening the door for those types of opportunities, because that's where real impact and real growth and real connection actually happens.
So when I hear that and I read that, these are some of the things that went through my mind that made me say, oh, because sometimes it's almost like you need to, I'll speak for myself. Sometimes I almost feel like I need to understand it surrounding an idea or a concept that isn't heavy, let's call it that isn't profound, that isn't really gonna make someone feel good, bad, or hurt or not, right? It's almost like, just like what does it look like if it were just easy? Because this is not easy, right? But
Right.
like when I heard that, I was thinking about, like, for instance, we always talk about the different types of personalities that we sell to. And as a matter of fact, Sharon Sherman was on the show about a month ago, and she talked about the fire, water, earth, and whatever, air personalities. And she talked about it in a way that was, look, you might be a fire, but if you handle and you deliver to every single consumer with underneath the values of a fire, you are not going to be able to communicate effectively with a water or an air. They are just going to keep looking at you going, what are you doing? And so I'm hearing cultural competence, Jessica, in that same vein. If I can acknowledge that me as a fire personality, when I'm dealing with an earth personality, that I've got to sit a little, slower. I got to talk a little slower. I got to think before I just got to, like, it's, to me, it's the same as if I'm like, that's what I think you're saying is like, I might not know what it's like to be gay, or I don't know what it's like to be Black, but just because I'm not those things, cultural competence, I start to achieve that if I just start to understand that what happens and how a gay person is experiencing something or reacting to something is going to be through a different lens than myself. Am I on the right track?
You are. You definitely are, because
Mhm.
that is pretty much what it's about. It's understanding that we may be in the same room looking at the same thing, but we're going to process it differently.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
this is what I'm saying. In much less charged situations, I think we
You get
mostly
it.
all get that. And
Right.
then all of a sudden, when it's about sex or race or ethnicity, we're like, nah, that's not how it is. It's like, well, but I mean, any of us that has a sibling, have you ever talked to your sibling about, my sibling and I are 18 months apart. You would think he was raised on Mars and I was raised on Jupiter. We talk about our like childhood, and I'm like, wait, when did that happen?
I,
That didn't happen. Like, we're 18 months apart. We're not like 10 years apart. And so if you can recognize that you can grow up in the same home and have completely different viewpoints, attitudes, experiences, how can you debate it across cultures, ethnicities, and, like you said, gender and age and body size and all the things? It's illogical, but we do it all the time, though, don't we, Jessica?
we
We
do.
discount it all the time.
We do completely, and those are the more charged things, so they're harder for us to process, or we choose not to process them. And that all of what you're saying goes back to bias, which is basically about stories that are created in our heads based on our experience.
Right.
And I see some people cringe when you bring it up. You say, "Oh, unconscious bias." Like, I'm not biased. That means I'm wrong. No, that means you're human. We all have biases. There are certain things that have happened in our lives, whether it's things we experienced personally, whether it's narratives we heard growing up, whether it was shows that we watched, whether it was stories that were read to us. All of those things inform our views of other people. And the thing is about, and I always make sure if I'm ever going to bring up unconscious bias, I also have to bring up the fact that you can disrupt it. It's one thing to become aware of it, which is, I think, where a lot of training and learning around unconscious bias stops. Um, okay, it is good to become aware of it, because you can only interrupt it if you know it's there.
Mm.
And that is the key component of even bringing it up, is understanding, okay, I have this bias. I made up this narrative about these type of people. What happens, like, what situations in my life does that get triggered? And oh my goodness, what decisions am I making based on that?
Hmm. Right.
And what decisions could I make differently if I if I take a moment to pause and really ask what is really true in this moment about this person, about how we're engaging and what's happening right now.
Yeah. No, I remember when I had a conversation with Rashida Gray on the show, and I remember it sticks so loudly in my head how when she told a story about how she was being approached by a car with a light at night in the dark, and she described how she was terrified it might be a cop. And I thought to myself, that is the essence of bias, right? Like my bias is if I'm on a dark road in the middle of the night and there's a light, I'm hoping it's a cop and she's hoping it's not. And that is a real thing based on the actual experiences that each of us have had on this planet. And that's what you're saying. It's like, I can't look at her and go, that's crazy. Why wouldn't you want it to be a cop? Where did you ever learn that nonsense? I have to come to that conversation and literally just be willing to say, oh, tell me more about that, right? How does that happen for you? Why did you know what I mean? Like that's what you're saying. It's like instead of telling somebody that's baseless, we
Right.
have to be willing to ask and understand how it happens that way and why those feelings are there. Am I right,
Right.
Jessica?
And
Yeah.
also to accept that that is her
Truth.
experience.
That's it. It's her truth.
And that's going to inform how she experiences law enforcement in her
All the
life
yes.
all the time
Well, and
in
it's so
any
funny.
context. Mhm.
And it's so funny because from a completely business standpoint, sideline now. Anybody who has coached with me, plus everybody who has listened to this podcast long enough knows, you know what's my number one line, which is not born out of this, it's just born out of logic. Whenever I am having a conversation with an existing consumer client of mine or a potential, when I get to the point in the conversation where they want to debate with me how much I should charge for something or what I'm going to deliver or something, or whether they want me to change my process in order, here's what I say. And I tell to every single designer I've ever coached, here's your money line. In my experience, when I change this part of the process, we can expect the project to take a left turn. So it's, this is exactly the crux of it. It's
Right.
Rashida's experience or somebody that's their experience. And I feel like, to your point, a lot of us just say, and don't explore, right?
Right. And also to your point, a lot of us don't feel safe to say in my experience
Right.
because we're not in an environment where people want to hear what our experience is, or we're afraid to bring it up because who wants to share their experience and have it ignored, devalued, brushed aside, or even argued against? So that is a critical concept too to keep in mind when people are sharing what their experience is. A lot goes into that decision.
That it takes a lot
Mm.
when you have been treated poorly, when you have experienced over and over again the negative result of, for the other side of it to understand that it took a lot for that person to share it to begin with, is what you're saying.
Correct.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good point to know. Okay. So cultural competence is a recurring theme throughout the book, and then lived experiencers. I mean, when you read it, it makes sense, but go ahead and explain it to us.
Yes. So lived experience is the experience that someone has living as a member of a marginalized group.
It just is. It's
It
their
just
experience.
that is exactly what it is. And it's interesting because I hear it used in different contexts. And yes, every living being has an experience. But when we're talking about lived experience, it is specifically in the context of people who are a member of a marginalized group and what that experience is like.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I also, this is a good place to just remind everybody that you really aren't in your book. You really aren't talking specifically and only about color. You are talking about, you know, all marginalized communities.
Correct. And as I will always say, we can't really get past, we can't talk about identity and difference broadly without really focusing also on race and ethnicity, because as I mentioned earlier, in this society, those are the big factors. They
Right.
are the key factors that actually amplify every other dimension of difference.
Yes.
But yes, we are speaking comprehensively. So everybody, any designer, needs to lean into this concept, and not also think that just our experience is the only experience,
Yeah.
and our
There's
identity is the only identity. Mhm.
So there are, you have the 6 habits of cultural competence, which are six pillars, basically a process. It's a process that each of us can learn about, do some work on, practice some more on, like try and bring it into the culture of our business. Okay. And so we're going to go through them because I love, a good action guide. Like that's the thing, right?
Right.
Before we get to that though, I do want you to just take a few moments and just talk about in your book, you had a couple of examples of where, so let me back up. So in your book, you also talk about that, as we said, it's not just an operational difference that a design firm needs to make. It's actually a difference in designing. And you say that it is the duty of the interior designer to have awareness and sensitivity in going about their design for all of the communities that they design for. Okay. And so, but you mentioned a couple of situations that once you read them, you're like, that seems pretty obvious, but they weren't obvious, which is how they ended up to be in your book. So
Right.
I just want to take some of these are these are big faux pas. These are things that when you saw them, visceral reaction to them. And so I think it's important. So there were 3 particular examples. Go through it with us.
Sure, sure. So, well, one was a headline I came across, involving a Louis Vuitton sweater that was released, actually, I believe, in May of 2021, in recognition of Jamaican heritage. And the controversy came about because the colors of the sweater were red, yellow, and green. And the colors associated with Jamaican heritage are typically the colors of their flag, which are yellow, green, and black. And it was one of those things that to me is a glaring thing, because I also have an understanding that, of the fact that red, yellow, and green are associated with Rastafarianism, which is a belief system that some Jamaicans believe in. But it's not representative of all of Jamaica. So when I saw that, I immediately, as soon as I saw the picture, I got it, and I was like, come on. And it was interesting to read through the article because they shared, for example, a tweet that somebody had posted just saying, how could this not be caught? Like this is a prime example of why diversity is needed in the design industry, because somebody in the room should have caught that. Somebody in the room should have been able to speak up and say, that ain't it.
Yes.
Somewhere along the process with approvals, and we know what the design process is like, somebody should have known this is wrong.
Right.
And before it gets out into the world, and especially when you think about a name as big as Louis Vuitton, like no one caught that.
Right.
And then it was also, as we briefly talked about the kind of haphazard way they went about trying to clean it up, just in updating the description of the item, and then it was still wrong. They ultimately just had to take it down.
Well, and it's like, the thing is, to your point, this isn't a mom and pop shop on the corner.
Right.
This is a company with resources. And I guess I think what I'm hearing you say is, number one, you're a company with resources. Do your fact checking. If you're going to say that this is representative of the Jamaican flag, then it's like the U.S. flag and putting green in there instead of blue. Okay, close enough. It kind of looks American, not sure. Like it's just like, what? Okay. But I think what I read in your book too, not specifically to that example, but one of the messages that I got in reading your book was, if somebody in that room did know but didn't feel safe to push back, right? So maybe there was one designer in that room that knew it and just knew it was not an environment where it was safe for that person, or the other side of that is there is no one in that room that even would have any idea what the Jamaican culture is, and so therefore, what are you even doing it then? Like what it was like what's the word, performative, right? Like we're just doing this for kicks and giggles because like whatever. And so I think it was that sort of level that I learned in your book. It was, you have to create an environment where the people around you feel like it's safe to say, hey, dummy, you missed it, right?
Right, right. And it also could have been the case that someone did speak up and someone else didn't think it was significant enough to really
Right,
make the change.
right.
So it is just what we're saying though, about creating that space for the communication to happen and
Yeah,
for
yeah.
there to be that extra step in the research to make sure that what we're putting out into the world does not harm, offend, or slight or erase people's identity.
Yeah. And I think the thing of it is too, is you do have to take these examples to things where you would, I mean, how, like, what, do we have an interior designer on the planet that's not emotionally attached their logo to their color palette? Like, this is a country that you got the colors wrong.
Right, right. I mean, as simple as a Google search, I just don't know what the misstep is
Yeah.
there. It
I mean,
just
my
doesn't make
name is
sense.
a pain. My name's a pain. I have a capital A. I have no E, and the number of times I'm just like, really, can you just spell it right? Like, is that hard? So, okay. All right. And then you had the two examples about the actual design of interior designers. That's graphic design and fashion design. And then you had the interior design examples.
Yes, yes. So the interiors design, they were interesting. So one was from a picture that a friend showed me, a photo shoot from from some interior designer's recent project, and I looked, to look at it, I did have the understanding that the designer was Black and that the client was Black, and the space was essentially designed to celebrate the homeowner's culture and their heritage, which was something I read right away, and it was everything was presented in a way that was seemed respectful and celebratory of that person's heritage. There were, African sculptures there in the spaces. There was a lot of variety of colors that I know I traditionally associate with African cultures. And then there was one item, this one piece of decor that was on a table that looked like the links of a chain. And it automatically stood out to me like, what is that doing there?
Mm,
Because in my mind, I associate that with slavery in the context of a space for Black people. That just stood out as something that was so off with the whole tone of the rest of the space. And just so like the opposite of celebratory.
mm-hmm.
And I just really had questions about how that ended up in that space.
Right.
And obviously, the friend who showed it to me, who was also a Black woman, had those same questions. And we were just like, I don't get how this got in here. Now, you and I were actually just talking briefly before about how that seems to be a trendy kind of trinket in a lot of spaces, like seeing this kind of chain link motif.
Right. It got very
But that
popular.
doesn't always make it right. And I wondered,
Mhm.
was the designer aware of this? Was it meant to be like ironic in a way? Was the homeowner in on it? Did the homeowner look at it and think, what is this? Is that
Yes.
something they took and threw out the second the designer left? I don't know. But the fact that it just raises so many questions, it just seemed like a prime example for the need for conversation about items that we choose to put into a space
Mhm.
and being open to a conversation about the message that they could potentially send.
Yeah.
And it was a similar kind of instance when I made a reference to a show on our beloved Design Network that many of us watch and are familiar with, um, where the designers were walking a Black couple through their newly redesigned home, and they got to the dining room, and the light fixture was comprised of rope, and it was all rope, and it was the whole thing was rope. And what I automatically thought was, who would think to put a piece that is rope that is hanging from a ceiling in the home of a Black family?
Right.
Because my mind instantly went to lynching.
Right.
And it was so odd to me. I just it actually I haven't seen that. They repeat a lot of episodes. I actually
Yes.
haven't seen this one repeated very much. I don't know if that's just me. I don't know.
Right.
Um, but I would hope somebody may have mentioned that because it was one of those things that was so off. The whole rest of the space was generally as culturally neutral as most of
Neutral.
those spaces are, the way they present them.
Not really representative of the person they designed for, but
Not at all, or many people in general. It's like insert person A, you can live here.
right,
Insert
right.
person B, you
Interchange.
can live here.
It's like we say about our websites. If I can change the name on your about page to anybody, then you have not written a proper about you page, right?
You have
She
not
is the
achieved the goal.
designer who is attracted and is like, loves to design for, and la la la. It's great. Insert Susie, insert Sally, do whatever you want. Right. Yeah. And that's what that kind
Exactly.
of design is that you're talking about. But that was, and so the thing is, what's interesting is the first example is a Black designer for a Black family. And so your lesson, if I'm hearing you right, and after reading your book, Jessica, you don't strike me as what you're saying. And I'm asking you, I'm not telling you,
Mhm.
you don't strike me as what you're saying in here. The message isn't ascribe to what my beliefs are that this chain is offensive. I think the message that I've heard from your book is, as a designer, even if you are a Black designer designing for a Black family or a white for a white, whatever it is, you wanted to know, did that designer have the conversation with the client? And, or to your point, was the client possibly reacting like you? And the second the designer was done, they chucked it in the garbage. So it's that awareness that you're saying is the responsibility of the designer to be sensitive to all the things, whether it's race, ethnicity, size, and sexual orientation. All like yeah, it's a lot. Just like it's a lot to really know all the codes for building and floor plans. It's a lot to be a designer. Honestly, that's
It
basically
is.
what you're saying.
It
Here's
is
one more thing. Here's one more thing. Get over it.
it is a lot, but I will also say it's not on the designer to learn absolutely every aspect about every identity. The point is for the designer to make space for the conversation.
Ask.
And that's, the most powerful question I think I present in the entire book is for a designer to initially ask a customer, what about your identity would you like to see celebrated in this space? Then
Yes.
you leave it open to them. They will disclose what's most meaningful to them. And in the process of working with them, building this relationship, building this rapport, building this trust to even talk about identity, then you can start to learn. The idea is that the designer is likely going to learn as much from the customer as the customer is going to learn from the design experience. And that's the value of it. That's the good thing, is that you don't have to know everything. You don't have to have the exact same lived experience in all dimensions with your customer. The idea is that you open the door for the conversation so that you can learn. And the idea also is not that we had this conversation one time in our initial our initial consultation, and then we don't touch it again until we go back and present.
Right.
That's not it either. The point is that we start the conversation and it's a continuing conversation,
Right.
so that we go back as we come up with concepts. We ask, is this right? Am I on the right page, or am I going down the right path? And you're validating the information with them so that the end product still is something that they have a say in. And it's still something that resonates with them and honors their identity.
Right. Because even I think the obvious here too is that what you're saying is, I don't need to know everything about your culture, whoever I'm talking to. I have to be willing to ask you in a respectful way, listen to it, not say yeah but to it, right? Because even like, say, within the same community, right? Like, so Black designer to Black consumer. Well, one could be from Jamaica and one from somewhere else. Like that, just because the skin color on the outside is different doesn't mean when you ask that question, what is important about your culture and your identity to bring in this space, that is going to be different for every person, period, regardless of the bigger group that they identify with. Right, Jessica?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's also not on us as the designer too, like you said,
To
make
know all of it.
assumptions
Yeah.
to also make assumptions. Like if we see something about this person that's similar, like, oh, I got this. I don't even have to ask the question. No, 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 no.
No,
Yeah,
no, no.
you do still have to ask the question because even if there is something you have in common, they may interpret it differently than you do. And the thing is, as designers, it's not on us to interpret somebody's culture or identity. It
Mhm.
is on us to open the door, as I mentioned, for the conversation, to receive the information, to process it, to do what we do as designers with that new information.
Right.
But it's not on us to come up with our interpretation of somebody's identity. That's where we go wrong. That's where it gets performative. That's where we do harm. And just like you're saying, that's also where we start doing that weeding process in our minds of like, I don't know if this works with my aesthetic. Or
Right.
I don't know that, they said that that's something that's significant to them, but it doesn't work with the solution that I've come up with.
Right.
No, you don't get to edit them out.
Right. And again, when we take it to scenarios that aren't as charged, right? We get it. So if you walk in my house and you say, "What's important in your kitchen?" I'm going to be like, "Pretty much nothing." Like that there's enough that I have dance space. That's it. Like every kitchen I've ever had that I've designed from scratch, I'm like about the dance floor. Like I don't want an island, thank you, because that's where we dance, okay? So like, but it would be as dismissive, right? It's not as charged. It's not as charged. But if all of a sudden every version of the kitchen came back with this blasted island, and I'm like, wait a minute, what am I doing? A conga line in my kitchen? Like, no, I got to dance in the middle of it. What are you doing? What part of what I said to you? It's literally been the number one thing I said. Like, okay, we have to have it big enough in the middle for us to dance in, period. Like people look at me like, what? I'm like, no, it's a real thing. This is where we dance.
And if they didn't want to design around that, I mean,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like that's what we're there to do, is to serve our customers. So if
that's
our
what I'm
customers
saying.
give us information and they say, I want to dance in the kitchen, let them dance in the kitchen.
That's what I'm saying. It's like we get it on the little things. That's my
Right.
thing, right? We
Right.
get it on the little things, but on the bigger things, we either don't do it because we're not educated in this regard and we don't think about it. We live in our own brain with our own bias and we just go about our own stuff. And that's exactly what your book is trying to overcome is open your eyeballs. There's a whole wide world out there. And if you're an interior designer that's going to deliver for any consumer that you come across, these are the things that you've got to be thinking about. You cannot, no more would you ignore my request for no island than you should ignore an opportunity to have a conversation to actually understand what's important to someone so that your home identifies and feels like them, right? Okay.
Exactly. And that's especially critical now because, look at how the demographics of our society are shifting. We're going to be majority minority very soon.
That's it.
And that means our customer base is changing. That means our future talent pool is changing. And yet, as an industry, the design industry is still very homogenous.
Yes,
So
with their face in the sand.
exactly. So we need to get on board because this is our future. This
Yeah.
is what we need to be prepared to face. And that's also why we need more diversity among the profession as well. Not just to check a box and say, look at us, we hit our targets. It's because the more people you have with varied lived experience among your team, among your staff, in your firm, the more people they can connect with authentically among your future customer base, talent pool, etc.
Yeah.
And I think anybody who's interviewing now, especially for more junior roles, knows that candidates are asking for proof about DEI and how organizations are backing up all these statements that they're making. One way to do that is to be able to point to this process that I present in the book and say, yes, we are addressing it. This is how we're addressing it. This is how we're making impact. This is how we're changing the way we do things so that we can bring about more positive outcomes for people who have historically been excluded.
100%. I love it. I love it. Okay, so this conversation will be continued. That's the only way we could do this show because Jessica and I have way more to discuss. Okay, once we got going, we realized that we couldn't give the topic the time it deserved in one conversation, so we left it right there. But don't worry, Jessica and I have already had our second chat, and the second part of the series is coming out in just a couple of weeks. In that second podcast, we will focus on Jessica's 6 habits of culturally competent designers. And this might have worked out perfectly because this gives you the time now to pick up her book and read it before the next episode so that you will have a greater understanding. You can get Jessica's book, Design for Identity, How to Design Authentically for a Diverse World, through Amazon, as well as through her website, jessicabantom.com. Order a copy. Do it now. You will not regret it. It is readable, relatable, enlightening, and important. And it will give you more clarity as we dig into the 6 steps next time. Now, let's take a walk back through today's conversation. First, in writing this book, Jessica aims to normalize the challenging conversation about identity. She wants to help us take big and small actions to create meaningful outcomes for historically excluded people. Jessica explains to us that cultural competence is about learning and unlearning, then flexing those muscles to strengthen our knowledge until it's natural, like muscle memory. One way we learn is by creating a safe communication environment. She gave us the Louis Vuitton example. They messed this effort up big time, but they shouldn't have. They needed to create a space for communication. One simple yet intentional step. If they had done it, and the outcome would have been so different. They should have taken that extra step and did their research. Jessica says the two go hand in hand. As designers, you need to create space for communication to happen and take the extra step in your research to ensure that you are putting out into the world something that doesn't harm, offend, slight, or erase someone's identity. Another example Jessica mentioned was the chain link trinket, right? And I bring this up because just because something is trendy doesn't mean it's right. We have to think. Jessica calls this a prime example of the need for conversation about the items we choose and the messages that they could potentially be sending. This isn't about Jessica insisting that everyone ascribe to her belief system. Again, it goes back to always and intentionally making space for the conversation for everyone on your team and your clients to have a feeling, a safety that they can talk. And then knowing, and I'm talking to you as a designer, then knowing that it is then your responsibility to be sensitive to every type of identity, whether it's race, religion, size, ethnicity. Just the same, it is your responsibility to know the codes for buildings and your responsibility for understanding the proportion on floor plans, right? Jessica clarifies that she doesn't mean the onus is on you as the designer to know every single aspect of every single identity, okay? But research is pretty accessible these days with the internet, so making an effort and definitely making space for the conversation, the what do I not know that I didn't know conversation, right? Now, how do we do that? Well, in the book, Jessica gives us tools. She got us started with some of the language today. She says to ask your clients, what about your identity would you like to see celebrated in this space? And leave it open to them. Listen, right? Most likely they will let you know what is meaningful to them. And this begins the process. This isn't a one and done conversation. You will continue to build upon this throughout the design process. You will validate what you are doing with and for them. You'll give them a say in the process, and you'll make a safe space for them to talk about their identity and how they want it portrayed through your design vision, right? You have to start, you're the one to start this trust, to build this trust, right? And to Jessica's point, I bet you will learn from this process. Every time you'll learn something different. And that's what it means to be a culturally competent design activist. Okay. I doubt you got into this business because you thought it would be easy. And even if you did, you know by now that it is anything but easy to be an interior designer, right? There is an art and a science, and every emotion possible goes into interior design. But the fact that you are here listening and hopefully taking this conversation to heart shows that you are intentionally trying to be in the right place at the right time, right? Being open to doing better, being open to unlearning things we thought we knew. This is the start for all of us, right? I'm talking to you as designers because that's Jessica's focus on this book. But this is a lesson that crosses all industries, podcasting, window treatments, all of it, right? We have to follow through. We can't stop here. We have to implement changes starting with ourselves and how we operate our businesses. We are the future of this industry. You are the future of the design industry. What part will you play in making it better for everyone, not just those who look and think like you? Jessica, for sure, is doing her part. Now, while we prepare for her second episode, to air, you can do a few things if you want to be better to do better. First, read Jessica's book. Then there are a few other episodes that harmonize well with this one that you can go back and listen to. In episode 732, Erica Corday and I discussed incorporating DEI practices into your business. In episode 816, I spoke with Elsie St. Leger about addressing racial inequality in the design industry. Both of these lay a foundation for what Jessica is continuing and teaching us. Then in episode 862, Janine Hayes and Brian Mason of Afro Chic joined me to discuss their latest book, Afro Chic, Celebrating the Legacy of the Black Family Home. And this was a powerful discussion also about designing for identity and how we all need to make space for these conversations to be part of the change in the industry and the country. Okay. Listening to and then having these conversations means showing up with an open mind and an open heart. I don't know where you are in your journey as an inclusive global citizen, so it might require you to step out of your comfort zone. But as I mentioned in episode 892, I talked about it during this episode. 892, Sharon Sherman was here, and she gave us helpful tips to navigate the 4 personality types, okay? Fire, air, water, and earth. And she gave us insightful ways to deal with each type, making it easier for you to work with them. That concept crosses over to identity, right? We can understand, let's take the time to learn about a fire personality and an air personality. It will make my business better. It will make it better for my client. Well, we have to take that to thinking about the other types of historically excluded identities, okay? It will only make you better and your business better, all right? So all of those shows I will link in the show notes, all right? Now, Jessica is going to be at High Point Market in October. I am so super excited for this. She's going to speak in the theater on Saturday, October 14th at 3 p.m. So if you are attending High Point, this is 2023, fall 2023, I hope you make a plan to hear Jessica in person. I'm calling it right now, and I said it to Jessica as well, on and off air. I think she will be a tremendous leading voice in our industry in no time. Right? She is the real deal. She's talented. She's knowledgeable. She's tough but fair and deeply passionate about her mission. This is a recipe for success if I've ever seen one. Now, I have to tell you the truth. I have a panel at 2 and another panel at 4:30 on Saturday. But I promise you, I will be hightailing it between these 2 panels to see Jessica live in the theater. This is a not miss lady, I'm telling you. All right, so in a couple of weeks, come back for part 2. Now, of course, if you're listening to this in the future, it's right there in your feed, okay? So today, we talked about the why and the what of the state of diversity or the lack of diversity in designing for identity. And then when we get into the 6 habits of culturally competent designers, that's the how. The how do I personally make change in myself first and then change in the industry? Okay, so don't miss it. All right. Thank you, Jessica. You and your information are fundamental to our growth as humans and in our industry. And I am delighted that we could connect and that you could share your message of designing for identity with us. I can't wait for all of you to hear part 2. Thank you too for listening, for showing up, for just putting one foot in front of the other and trying to make things better. I admire that in you. Together we can change the industry for the better. I know that we can do it. Thanks for being here. Decide to be excellent. Thank you for joining me today. This podcast is a production of LuAnn Nigara, Inc. If you want to know more about me, my books, or LuAnn University, go to LuAnnNigara.com. And if you are interested in having WindowWorks help you with your next window treatment or awning project in the New York, New Jersey metro area, go to WindowWorksNJ.com to learn more. Have an excellent day.